Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Diana White, the Director of Programs and Events at the PGA. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this PGA conversation with the Executive Producer and Director of Demi Lovato, Dancing with the Devil. Please join me in welcoming Michael D. Ratner. Before we get started with the conversation today, the PGA would love to thank OBB Media for making this panel possible. It is now my pleasure to also pass it off to our moderator, Jazz Tangcay. Jazz is the Senior Artisans Editor at Variety and covers all crafts below the line. She is also on the awards team analyzing the Emmys and the Oscars races. Thanks, Jazz. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you, of course, to the Producers Guild of America. Michael, hello and welcome.
How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you doing?
Everything's good. Living in this crazy world, but all is well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm really, fascinated to hear what you have to say about Demi Lovato, Dancing with the Devil. It is such a powerful series. I'd love to hear, how did it actually begin?
Great question. It was the beginning of it was the very beginning of the pandemic, and it was March 2020. I had just come off of directing and producing the Justin Bieber Seasons documentary, and it was a 10-part doc, and it came out week over week and basically wrapped up just around when the world started falling apart. And I was thinking about, I had a few projects that I was looking to do next, and right around, I want to say the midpoint of that series coming out, I got connected to Demi because Demi was ready to tell their story. And obviously, Demi, after their overdose, did not go and do any interviews and wasn't out publicly. They're really working on themselves. And I think that when you experience trauma or sort of a life-altering moment like that, you are only ready to tell your story on your terms. And when you feel like you can use the catharsis and that will be a healing endeavor. And that was the moment in time when Demi had that feeling and did a lot of self-work prior to that. And I think after watching Seasons, Demi was inspired by the openness that, quite frankly, Justin, spearheaded in his ability to talk about his mental health issues and Lyme disease and things like that, which was really brave. And we connected and talked about what they were looking to do and what happened and what they wanted to accomplish. And I'm thrilled to say that we got on the same page quickly. And then I just was there to listen and put the story together. And it was not planned that it would be during a pandemic. And I think that was a pivotal moment where, we had to think, oh, do we put this on pause and wait until things normalize a bit? And Demi was the one that said, no, the time I need to tell the story right now. And that's when we immediately jumped into health and safety protocols and figuring out how to do that, because we figured it out a bit now, but back then everything was foreign. It was really difficult. And to Demi's credit, they said to me, if you can figure out how to pull this off, I'm ready to go. And that's when we started.
Wow. I mean, you mentioned the timeliness of this, and Demi calling you, but this is a story that's still unfolding, and that's the thing with documentary storytelling. There isn't, especially verite style, there isn't always the ending. What made you say, yes, okay, this is the right time for me to talk to Demi and tell their story and do it at this point, rather than wait 6 months or a year and see how it plays out?
Well, anytime that you're doing a documentary on somebody who's in their 20s, right? You're not telling their life story. You're telling a moment in time. And I think that if you're constantly searching for that perfect endpoint, you're never gonna go for it. And that doesn't mean that every story is ready to be told at every moment. But I felt like all I needed to know was that Demi had the feeling that she wanted this outlet, that they wanted this outlet, that they wanted this opportunity to have a conversation about what they went through, and that they felt compelled to tell it at that moment. And while they are still on their journey. I mean, nobody is more open to growing and evolving as Demi Lovato, period. I mean, and you know, I said to Demi when we wrapped, I said, okay, time to start shooting the next one, because their story is always changing in a really good way, right? Where they're constantly working on themselves and figuring out who they are and open to change and not opening or closing any doors whatsoever. So was it the perfect time to tell the story? No, you know, it wasn't. Was there a more perfect time? No, there wasn't. So we did it and created self-imposed deadlines and put this project out, which really told the specific moment in time. But you know, the final scene, we talk about how there are no definitive resolutions in this project. It's not like you go and we say, and as such, Demi is cured, or as such, here's now where we are. It's all fluid. And I think that Demi's life since then has continued to be fluid, and they're very proud of that. And they're not the poster child for anything at all. And ultimately, this is a project about Demi's experience, and hopefully people can see in Demi's unique experience that it's okay to feel any which way about anything going on in your life. And I think that's what made it the time to shoot this film. And hopefully, people took away really positive things from it.
Yeah. And it is, there's so much that you showcase. But you don't just tell, Demi's story. You bring in people, close friends, that inner circle who were there professionally and personal. Like, how did you decide who was integral to helping support Demi's story?
That is a really good question too. It was, I would bring people into the fold through my learnings. I really didn't go in with a perfect roadmap. I knew I wanted to speak to to their parents. I knew I wanted to speak to their sisters. I was really open from our initial conversation and really listening closely to who was impacting Demi's life from various stages and who was relevant today, because we were telling a story in the present, and the goal was to sort of clear the air, tell the truth, and move on. And I would listen, and I would dig deeper and ask more questions about people that Demi would bring up. And then I would ultimately go and explain to Demi and or the subject why I thought that they would be an important, piece, mouthpiece in this project. And that sort of just became really evident. You couldn't tell the story without talking about Max Lee, who runs her operations and security. He's been there through so much and still to this day, and is a key piece of Demi's life. You couldn't really tell this story without her family, her sisters, her mom, her dad. I thought that a really interesting piece of this story was with Danny Vitale, right? And I think that Danny Vitale was one of the people who maybe benefited the most from this project, alongside, of course, Demi being able to use this as catharsis, because Danny was able to tell her side of the story, which she really wasn't able to do. And Demi told that same story, the truth. And, I think that must have been a really hard year, or 18 months, for both of them to have this false narrative out there. And I think that hopefully, people understood why certain choices were made and why we tried to tell as complete of a picture as possible. And that's how we picked the people from Demi's inner circle or inner circle adjacent. But then there was also just some really fun decisions to be made. Like as you know, in the 4th episode, we had Will Ferrell, and we had Christina Aguilera and Elton John. And that was like, can we have other iconic people talking about Demi, who's iconic, and showing this rarefied air that they're in, and how much they've influenced and impact the lives of other icons. And for one reason or another, they made sense. Elton, obviously, they've collaborated together, and Will Ferrell, they did a film together, and I thought that was really fun and light, and the film could use some of that. And then Christina Aguilera, they've had this really interesting, almost like generational relationship where they've helped each other. And that's always a really fun piece of the project too. And, you know, the Lovatic fan base is pretty incredible. And just giving them some moments like that was really fun. And seeing how much that paid off was really cool too.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned episode 4, because that is, that is the payoff at the end. Like, we see, these moments come together. But how did you decide that this was going to be like a 4-part docu-series as opposed to like, I'm going to tell this over a 90-minute documentary movie?
I thought we needed a moment to catch our breath over and over again. There's so much. I mean, in a perfect world, the options wouldn't have been just 4-part or 90-minute feature. It would have been like, can I have like 10 hours? There was a lot to cover, but I wanted to also make it something that you could digest and wasn't just going to be some super long drawn out thing, and not for any other reason than that's a bit atypical for a project like this. The reason for the 4 parts was I didn't want to steamroll over really crucial themes and moments. And I thought that breaking it into 4 parts would provide for thought and conversation. That's also why we didn't, release it all in one just bingeable, 1-day drop with all 4 episodes. Because if you really followed the conversations that came out of this project, it was awesome to see. I mean, you saw Twitter conversations going on, conversations. One of the great things about, the YouTube platform is you just get an engaged audience going back and forth, having meaningful conversations. So I wanted to allow those conversations to play out and each week to have its moment in the spotlight. And I also thought that, Demi's been through a lot, and to go from one trauma to the next, or to blur the lines between different really important issues ranging from mental health to sexuality to sexual trauma to eating disorders was a disservice to the severity of and complexity of why we got to that moment where everything came to a head on that awful night. And I think that 4 parts was a better attempt at doing the project justice than one straight through.
Yeah. And, you mentioned the themes, mental health, addiction, talk about sitting down with Demi. Like, how much time did you discuss that? Did you decide that this is how much time I'm going to spend with them? And how much time did you actually end up spending with Demi for this?
So much. So much. Yeah, but because I fell in love with this, when doing a project like this isn't, when I direct a comedy, when I'm on set with Kevin Hart and we're putting together these like laugh out loud moments, and I go home and I will catch up with my fiance and I eat my dinner and like on to the next, and you move on, not because those projects aren't hard, but there's just some like levity, and you sort of leave work and then you go on to your night and you start up again in the morning. This project, because of what we were dealing with and how complex it was and how heavy it was with you at all moments, and it would stay on my mind, and it would keep me up at times, and trying to understand certain parts and also respect boundaries of Demi has become a very close friend. So on the one hand, you care so much as a friend, and then you have this like duty as a filmmaker to tell the story objectively as partners, right? It's a lot to balance, and I found that the best way to effectively tell the story was, because we were in it together, was really understand what Demi wanted to share, and then if I could understand that, figure out as a filmmaker how best to present that. So that came through a lot of time together off camera and spending time together. We watched every cut together in their theater, which was always so interesting and powerful to watch Demi. I mean, imagine just watching some of the rough, or any moment of your life, but imagine some of the roughest moments of your life with all of the people in your circle talking about you when you're sitting there watching it, reliving it. I mean, it's really like unfathomable and so brave. And we'd sit there, and for the first time, Demi's seeing this, and I've put it together, and there's clearly, recreating this narrative that's their truth and the truth of those around them, and you hear everybody's memory of things. So I found that the best way to do that was trust and being together and spending that time. So I don't know that I could quantify it with an exact hours amount, but like it was many, many hours a week for, over a year.
Yeah. And, we are seeing more conversation around the importance of addressing mental health. And it's like a story, it's a filmmaker's responsibility to address those subjects with care, compassion, mindfulness, whilst being, authentically true to the story. And in the case Demi's story, but it's also very challenging when you've got the battle with addiction too. Like, what was some, I guess, challenging decisions you had to make when, putting this together?
There were a lot. I think that trying to stay focused on what's the North Star, what point are we trying to make? Can we tell a story, not necessarily in a linear capacity, but can we tell a cohesive story without spreading ourselves too thin? Your question about 4 parts or 90 minutes, there was just so much content. When you're trying to explain so much, you run the risk of being everywhere and nowhere. And I think that dropping certain things to really focus in and dig a bit on certain issues and topics that warranted larger discussion and more time was the hardest part to navigate. And there's certain you can't cover it all, right? If you can't cover it all. And I think that the edit was particularly tricky because we would try things out and realize, oh, how can you not include this? But then, or can you truncate it a bit, or can we kick it to a different episode? And I think we ultimately got there. But I remember there was, just long nights in the edit trying to get it all together. What I will say, and I've said before in interviews, and I'm very proud of this fact, is that Demi never wavered. Demi in our first conversation said, "I want to tell everything, no holds barred." And I think that there's real power in that there wasn't some, laundry list of exclusions. We can't talk about this, but I want you to talk more about it. It was really, I'm going to be the subject, and obviously she's they're the protagonist in this project. But I'm going to let you be the filmmaker, and I'm going to let you tell the story. And I think sometimes those things that were a bit painful to watch, ultimately to the point, were what were so important to share.
Yeah. The great thing about this documentary is that you don't necessarily follow the linear narrative approach. Talk about how you wanted to approach the narrative in that sense.
I think the unique thing with this project, unlike some others I did, was I was trying to really explain how so many different pieces of life, overtly, covertly, somewhere in the subconscious, all these things sort of came together to cause almost a fatal, disastrous, event. And I think that it's easy to think, oh, well, somebody went out and they did drugs, and as such, they almost died of an overdose. That's never just the story. We all end up in a particular circumstance or moment in time because of millions of small decisions, right? And I think that there were some really large decisions and themes that led to everything that took place that night, and really trying to do a deep dive as to what those were and how it led to that particular moment in time were interesting. And the reason why I wanted to tell it in a nonlinear capacity, I think that we come to realizations about why certain things happen at different moments in time. Some things, or very few, we realize prior, and some things we start to piece together after. And I think that, that's life, right? We start like figuring things out in no perfect sequence. And a lot of these different incidents and traumas from Demi's life started to come out and be clear as to maybe how that played a role in what took place that evening. And some of it, sure, is also just like, we can get unlucky or we can meet somebody that we shouldn't have, but there's also decisions that we actively make as human beings that lead to that. And I thought that was an interesting world to explore and sort of allow that sort of nonlinear chaos to play out as such. And the other thing I'll say is I found it really fascinating that I saw that firsthand. You know, Demi and I sat down on camera many times to talk. If you noticed, you know, there's many different sit downs with Demi. It's not one of these where it's just, you know, you get one shot to chat. And Demi would be more open or realize certain things on camera as the interviews progressed, which to me was so fascinating to document and see somebody sort of realizing maybe why certain things happen right in front of the camera.
Yeah. Well, to that point, you document the engagement, like the engagement, the unengagement of it all. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about being there for a moment of that. And as you said, you know, you're not just there's a much bigger story, but that also was such a big part of their story too.
Yes, that was you have to be willing to be malleable, right? Your document, you can't, whenever I pitch a documentary, an unscripted project, you know, you could put something down on paper and then life plays out. So I didn't have anything about that in the pitch deck. And then it happened. And I was so happy for Demi. Demi seemed so happy. And then I was ready to pivot and we started sort of shifting the edit accordingly. And then we shifted it back. You know, but as I said before, in the spirit of being honest, like to just gloss over that entirely didn't make sense. It was something that really played out. And again, I think we all spoke about, we didn't need to live there and try to turn this into just about that particular moment in time, but we had to address it. It was something that took place and certainly, you know, had to just move with it as it progressed.
Yeah. You also, you know, talking about moments, you know, it is that you recreate the overdose, which was again such a part of this story. How did you decide that this is to tell that visually?
Well, I think that there's power in just being on a talking head interview. And I've done that as a creative choice many times in my career where I just stick with it. And you want to see someone in their raw, unpolished capacity telling a part of their life. In the edit, I watched that and we really, with no details spared, talk about what took place. And I felt like it needed something visual. And I think that even as you see Demi at times close their eyes as they're thinking about it, what do you see? What do you visualize? And, you know, Demi was describing it almost in a way that felt a bit animated, recreated to me. And that was where the initial idea came from, and giving the audience something active to see, because there was no footage, right? There was no footage. All there was that little bit of tape from when, you know, the person who obviously was with her that night and left in the morning. And when you see the animation fade off and you see that surveillance video, I thought that was really interesting because the inherent messaging there was all of this did happen, right? And now you're seeing sort of the trickle and sort of transition into reality. And I think that had there been footage of it all, you know, maybe that would have been the choice. But since there wasn't, what could we fill in those moments with? And I felt like that was a pretty poetic yet disturbing yet interesting way to tell the story. And we spent a lot of time on the style of those drawings and wanted it almost to feel a bit dreamy and a bit eerie and a little bit it's almost like danced and rehearsed. And that was we actually shot that with actors, and then we sketched over it, which is just a, you know, certain style of animation. And I think I quite like that decision. And sometimes I go back and revisit these moments to see if I like them long after they're out. And I do think that moment worked.
Yeah, it was incredibly powerfully done too. You mentioned at the top of this that this was all done, at the onset of the pandemic. What were the challenges of putting this together, at the height of the pandemic when we didn't have vaccines and tests and,
Right.
we didn't know where we were going at this point?
We had the beginning of testing, so we were able to test. This whole thing was with
Right.
tests. There was so much confusion now about what was a PCR test, what was a rapid test. What I remember at the very beginning of this, we were doing the pricks on the finger, which was really for antibodies. So there's so much like misinformation. I'm incredibly queasy, so I got a finger prick and fainted actually before filming the first day, which I'm mortified to say on a panel. That's the truth. So that was really like a nice way to start. So we were constantly reading, guidelines and trying to keep everybody safe and doing our best, being socially distant, wearing masks. I remember on the first day, and this is now with all we know, it's really interesting that we did this, but we were following everything to a T, and there was a recommendation in one of those union guides that after every 20 minutes, you should clear out the room and Clorox, clean everything and air out the room. And we had different sprays and fans. And, I'm trying to conduct this interview. It's our first day shooting. And basically every 20 minutes, there'd be like a foghorn that would go off and we'd have to stop our interview just as we were getting somewhere, break, enter the room again. It was very hard to get somewhere. But like I said at the beginning, Demi said this is the time to do it. So I just think we would have gotten a very different project had we waited. And I think, there was no denying COVID became a character in this project. And, in the opening scene, we talk about the state of the world and what's going on. You see cleaning crews rubbing stuff down. And I think that those challenges that presented itself, rather than sort of try to totally mask them or avoid them, we just folded it in.
Yeah. What was the most surprising aspect? Like, what surprised you the most when you spent time with Demi, whether it was, when you were doing those interviews or just working with them behind the scenes?
I was pretty fascinated by what an incredible multi-hyphenate Demi is. And I know that might not sound like the most revelatory answer, but to be around somebody who is able to do so much, acting, singing. Demi throughout the whole project was really spending the time doing self-work into meditation and spirituality. Demi's so talented. Demi's so talented, but also, obviously hardworking and has surrounded herself with really good people. And I was amazed at how eclectic each day was with the mix of things going on. And really able to seemingly like master all. So I was pretty impressed with that. When we were filming, Demi was gearing up to work on a TV show and had the Dancing with the Devil album coming out. And there was just a lot going on. And I was really amazed to see that and witness how they navigate their days and their team. And it was really, really quite cool.
Yeah. You mentioned you're really good friends with Demi now, but looking back, so much of this is earning trust. Like, yes, Demi called you, Demi's seen your work, but still there's that face to face. How did you earn Demi's trust? Like, what was that way for you?
I think it's time. I think you talk to somebody and you give them your word and you're transparent and you represent that you operate with the utmost integrity and that they could tell you things and they won't be repeated. And someone says, okay. And then a month goes by and 2 months and 3 months. And I think that honoring my word and working incredibly hard on this project and taking everything that Demi said and even if I didn't have the perfect answer, always having an answer, whether that's like, I'll get back to you and then actually doing it, or respecting their wishes and understanding their boundaries, like all of that earns trust over time. And then I think when Demi first saw the first, I showed Demi the first 2 episodes. That was how we did it. It was, excuse me, no, we had planned to watch the first 2 together. I had both ready, and the first one was so heavy, Demi actually asked that we come back and watch the second another time. But I think Demi, it wasn't that they were disappointed, quite the opposite. They were so blown away by it and needed to just process it, that I think that was the moment it all truly solidified, where it was, we had this, personal relationship, we had this trust, and the work represented what Demi was hoping for. Because of all of that, I think it all worked to make that project what Demi had hoped. And then we just really started to hit stride and had a great rapport. And, I co-directed the Dancing with the Devil music video with Demi, which was really a recreation of what took place. That Demi was completely Demi's vision. And I think it was that trust that made Demi want to do that together. And then obviously for the past year since, we've been doing the 4D podcast, which obviously is with OBB Sound, which is our audio division. And, none of that was because we had to work together. It was working. It was all really special and working. And I'm excited to do more and more together.
Yeah. You mentioned the music video. I'm curious, what actually came first, the song "Dancing with the Devil" or the doc title, and that's stemmed the song?
The song came first. I heard the song, and I just thought it was almost like, it sounded like a Bond track. Like, it was just big and powerful. And I remember the first time I heard that song. I was in their studio. They have a studio like in the back of their house, and I was just like, what did I just listen to? We played it again. And I just, Dancing with the Devil has got to be the name of this doc. It just, and how unoriginal is that? But it had to be. It was just so good. And then of course, then I said, let's also make the intro sequence, Dancing with the Devil. And we did that XR sequence, which I thought was really cool. And there's obviously all those Easter eggs of different symbolism in the opener. But I just thought it was so powerful, and the vocals were so good, and the words were so special. So yeah, it was the song.
Yeah, it is a powerful song, and the music video is phenomenal, as is the documentary series. So Michael, congratulations, and thank you so much for that incredible conversation and insight into Demi Lovato Dancing with the Devil.
Thank you so much. That was really fun.
Thank you so much, Michael.